When I first moved into my new apartment, I was excited. Living alone was something I had always wanted. The place wasn't big, but it was cozy and felt like it could become home quickly. It was my first night there, and after a long day of unpacking, I finally settled into bed. I remember feeling content as I drifted off to sleep, thinking about how this new chapter in my life would be good for me. But then, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something. It was faint, almost like a soft tapping sound coming from the hallway. I told myself it was probably the neighbors or maybe the building settling. After all, it was an old building, and old buildings make noises, right? I pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to ignore it. The sound stopped before I could really think about it. It didn't bother me too much, and I soon fell asleep. The next night, I heard it again. The same soft footsteps, only this time they seemed a little closer. I sat up in bed, listening carefully. The sound wasn't coming from outside or above me. It was inside my apartment. My heart started to race, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just my imagination. I had been under a lot of stress lately, with moving and all. I convinced myself that I was overthinking and eventually managed to fall asleep again. Over the next few nights, the footsteps kept coming back. Every night, they seemed to get closer and closer to my bedroom. I tried to ignore them, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but it was getting harder. The sound was too clear, too deliberate. It wasn't just random creaks and groans from the old building. It was the sound of someone walking, someone who knew exactly where they were going. I started feeling anxious as soon as the sun went down. I dreaded going to bed, knowing that as soon as the apartment got quiet, the footsteps would return. I checked the apartment thoroughly several times, but I never found anything out of place. The doors were always locked, the windows shut tight. There was no sign of anyone being there except me. But the footsteps kept coming back. One night, the sound was louder, more intense. It was like whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know they were there. The footsteps came all the way to my bedroom door, and then they stopped. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to get up, to open the door and confront whatever was out there, but I was too scared to move. What if there really was someone there? What if they were waiting for me? I tried to convince myself that it was still just my imagination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The footsteps were real, and they were getting closer every night. I started staying up late, trying to keep myself awake so I wouldn't have to hear them. But no matter how late I stayed up, the footsteps always returned. Then, one night, they stopped right beside my bed. I had been lying there for hours, too scared to sleep, when I heard the familiar sound in the hallway. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like someone was taking their time. They came closer and closer until they were just outside my door. And then they kept going. I could hear them right next to my bed, as if someone was standing over me watching. I didn't dare move. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, staring into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The footsteps stopped, and there was only silence. It was the most terrifying silence I had ever experienced. I could feel something in the room with me, but I couldn't see or hear anything. I just knew it was there, standing right beside me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep out of sheer exhaustion because I woke up the next morning with the sunlight streaming through the window. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. The footsteps had stopped, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. In fact, it was worse now. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was still there, watching me. I checked the apartment again, more thoroughly this time, but I didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. It was like the footsteps had never happened, but I knew they had. I had heard them every night, getting closer and closer until they were right beside me. But now, they were gone, and I was left with a deep, unsettling fear. I started thinking about moving out, but something told me it wouldn't make a difference. The footsteps, the feeling of being watched, they would follow me wherever I went. They weren't tied to the apartment, they were tied to me. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew I couldn't escape it. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that someone is standing just behind me, watching. I can't hear the footsteps anymore, but the fear is still there, stronger than ever. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Every night I lie in bed, waiting for the sound to return, waiting for the silence that follows. And every night I wonder if this will be the night when I finally see what's been watching me all this time. I wasn't expecting the call. I hadn't heard from Jake in years, and our last conversation had ended on a sour note. We grew apart, life taking us in different directions. So when his name flashed on my screen late one Friday night, I almost didn't pick up, but something inside told me to answer. The voice on the other end was frantic, trembling with a fear I hadn't heard from him before. "Please, I need you," Jake said. His words rushed. "I'm in trouble. Can you come to my place? It's bad, really bad." He didn't wait for me to respond, just gave me an address that I didn't recognize and hung up. My heart raced, a mix of concern and confusion. What could be so bad that he would call me after all this time? Why not someone else, someone he was still close to? Despite the years of silence and the unease gnawing at me, I couldn't ignore the desperation in his voice. I grabbed my keys and drove through the night, my mind spinning with memories of our friendship and the strange tone in his voice. The streets grew emptier as I neared the address, an old neighborhood I had never been to. The houses here were worn with cracked paint and broken windows, as if life had moved on and left them behind. When I reached the address, I knew something was wrong. The house stood in darkness, no lights on inside or out. It looked abandoned, the kind of place where people would go to forget. I parked and hesitated for a moment, staring at the slightly open door. My gut told me to leave, to turn around and forget this ever happened, but Jake's voice echoed in my head. He needed me. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. The silence around me was unnerving, only broken by the soft creak of the door as I pushed it open. "Jake," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The house smelled stale, like it had been closed up for too long. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by my presence. I walked through the dim hallway, noticing the signs of disarray. A lamp had been knocked over and a table lay on its side, a shattered glass nearby. My breath quickened as I ventured further in, the sense of wrongness growing with each step. "Jake," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. As I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The room was a mess. Furniture was overturned, and there were dark stains on the carpet that made my stomach churn. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't just a messy house. Something bad had happened here. My chest tightened as I moved closer to the stains, not wanting to believe what they might be. In the corner of the room, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. It was a piece of paper, crumpled and half hidden under the edge of an overturned chair. I bent down and picked it up, hands shaking as I smoothed it out. The note was written in Jake's handwriting, but the words didn't make sense at first. "I'm sorry," it read. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could fix it, but it's too late now. If you're reading this, you need to leave. Don't look for me. Don't trust anyone." My heart pounded in my chest as I reread the note trying to understand. What had Jake done? What did he mean by, "Don't trust anyone"? The air around me felt heavier, suffocating. I needed to leave, but my legs felt rooted to the spot, my mind racing with questions and fear. A sudden noise from upstairs snapped me out of my thoughts. It was a soft creak, like a footstep on an old floorboard. My blood turned to ice as I realized I wasn't alone in the house. Someone, or something, was up there. My first instinct was to run, to get out before it was too late. But fear held me in place, frozen and listening for any more sounds. The silence was deafening. Then another creak, closer this time. Panic surged through me, and I finally forced myself to move. I turned to leave, to run back to the safety of my car, but as I reached the hallway, I saw a shadow move at the top of the stairs. It was slow, deliberate, like whoever was there wanted me to know they were coming. I bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. My footsteps echoed in the empty house, and I could hear whoever it was moving faster now, closing in behind me. I burst through the door, my lungs burning as I sprinted to my car. Fumbling with the keys, I threw myself inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to start the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching me go. My heart pounded in my ears, and I didn't stop driving until I was far from that house, far from the horror I had just escaped. When I finally pulled over, I was shaking all over, struggling to catch my breath. I called the police, but when they arrived at the house, they found nothing. No sign of a struggle, no dark stains, no note. It was as if none of it had ever happened. They told me the house had been abandoned for years, that no one named Jake had lived there for a long time. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Had I imagined it all? But Jake's voice still echoed in my mind, the fear in his words all too real. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in that house with me, that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I never heard from Jake again. The police said he was missing, his case unsolved. I tried to move on, to forget that night, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear footsteps outside my door, soft and deliberate, like someone is still looking for me. I want to share something that happened to me a few months ago. I've tried to push it out of my mind, but it keeps coming back, especially at night. I need to tell someone about it, so here it goes. I usually walk home from work. It's not far, and the walk helps me clear my head after a long day. But one evening, I noticed something that made my heart race. I was halfway home, passing by a row of shops that were just closing, when I saw a man standing across the street. At first, he looked like any other person, just standing there, maybe waiting for a bus or something. But when I kept walking, I noticed that he started to move too, keeping the same pace as me. It made me uneasy, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. I turned the corner onto a quieter street, one with fewer lights. As I walked, I felt a strange chill on the back of my neck, the kind that makes your skin prickle. I looked over my shoulder, and there he was again, just a bit behind me. He wasn't doing anything, just walking, but something about it felt wrong. My heart started beating faster, and I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way as me. But then, why was he always keeping that same distance? To shake off the fear, I took out my phone and pretended to make a call. I spoke loudly, hoping it would make him back off, but when I glanced back, he was still there. I took another turn, this time down a side street I never use. It was a narrow alley with old buildings that cast long shadows. I thought if I made enough random turns, he would lose track of me. I even picked up my pace, walking as fast as I could without running. But every time I looked back, he was still there, just a few steps behind, always keeping that same distance. I was beginning to panic, my breath coming out in short, shallow gasps. The street was empty, and I felt completely alone. I turned again, this time onto a main road filled with people. The crowd made me feel a bit safer, and I hoped that he would disappear into it. I walked into a small convenience store and pretended to browse, my eyes darting to the entrance. After a few minutes, I stepped out, glancing around, and for the first time, I didn't see him. My chest loosened, and I took a deep breath. Maybe I had lost him after all. I finally made it home, my heart still racing but starting to slow down. I locked the door behind me, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. My apartment was my safe space, and I was sure the worst was over. I tossed my keys on the table and collapsed on the couch, trying to shake off the lingering fear. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I figured it was a text from a friend or maybe a spam message. But when I looked at my phone, my blood ran cold. It was a message from an unknown number, just one picture. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The photo was of me, taken just moments before, walking into my house. I could see the back of my head, the way my hand was on the doorknob, just before I turned it to enter. Someone had been right behind me, close enough to take that picture, and I hadn't noticed. My hands started to shake. I stood up and locked the door again, double-checking the windows. I even checked the tiny peephole in the door, but all I saw was the empty hallway. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Would they even take me seriously? The photo didn't show the person who took it, just me. What if they were still outside, watching? I started to search the house, room by room, closet by closet. My apartment isn't big, but it felt like it took forever to check every corner. But there was nothing. No sign that anyone had been inside except me. I felt a bit silly, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. I told myself that maybe someone was just messing with me, that it was a prank, even though deep down I didn't believe it. I tried to go about my evening like normal, but everything felt off. Every noise, every creak made me jump. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself to check the message. It was from the same unknown number. This time, it was a video. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The screen showed my front door, just as it was right now. The camera seemed to be live streaming, and I saw a figure standing outside, just beyond the door. The person was wearing a hoodie, their face hidden in the shadows. They didn't move, didn't try to knock or open the door. They just stood there, waiting. I froze, unable to breathe. My mind went blank, and I didn't know what to do. The video continued, the person outside not moving at all. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I couldn't even see their face, just the outline of their body, still and silent. That's how it ended. The video stopped, and my phone went dark. I didn't get any more messages after that. I sat there for hours, too afraid to move, too scared to call for help. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but I don't remember how or when. When I woke up the next morning, everything was quiet. The person outside was gone. I checked the door, the windows, everything, but it all looked normal. I never saw that stranger again, and I never got any more messages. But every time I walk home, I can't help but look over my shoulder, wondering if they're still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. I took a babysitting job last Saturday, which seemed like easy money. The house was remote, surrounded by woods on all sides, and getting there felt like a long drive into nowhere. But the parents seemed nice. They gave me instructions about the kids' bedtime, showed me how to use the security system, and reminded me that all doors and windows were locked. It was a quiet area, they said, nothing to worry about. Once they left, the house felt way too quiet. The kids were easy to handle, and by 8:30 p.m., they were already in bed. I settled in the living room, trying to focus on my homework, but something felt off. The wind outside was picking up, making the tall trees sway back and forth, casting weird shadows through the windows. I kept glancing at the dark windows, feeling like I was being watched. But when I looked, there was nothing, just the empty woods. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I returned to my homework, but my phone buzzed, making me jump. It was an alert from the security app. Movement detected at the back door. My heart raced as I checked the live feed, but there was nothing there, just the empty backyard. The app had to be glitching, I thought. I tried to ignore it, but that uneasy feeling stayed with me. Minutes later, another alert. This time, movement was detected by the side of the house. Again, I checked the camera feed. Nothing. I got up and walked around, double-checking all the doors and windows. Everything was locked, just like the parents said. I tried to calm myself, thinking it might be a raccoon or something setting off the sensors. But then, I started hearing noises, soft creaks and taps, like footsteps coming from different parts of the house. I told myself it was the house settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sounds were too deliberate, too intentional. My mind raced with possibilities, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The alerts kept coming. One after another, movement detected all around the property. Every time I checked, there was nothing there. I began to feel trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands started to tremble. I couldn't think straight. I just wanted this night to be over. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway upstairs. The kids' room. My blood ran cold. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and slowly made my way to the stairs. My heart was beating so loud, I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. I moved as quietly as I could, taking each step slowly, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the top of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. I stood there, frozen, staring down the dark hallway. The door to the kids' room was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it earlier. My hand shook as I pushed it open. My breath caught in my throat. The room was empty. The kids were still asleep, but the window was open. I knew I had closed it. I locked it myself. I was sure of it. Panic set in, and I rushed to close it again, locking it tight. I checked the closet, under the bed, anywhere someone could hide, but there was nothing. No one. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That the security app was glitching? That I was hearing noises? I didn't even know if they'd believe me. But I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I grabbed the kids, waking them up as gently as I could, telling them we had to leave. They were confused, sleepy, but I didn't have time to explain. I carried the younger one holding the older one's hand as we hurried down the stairs, through the front door and out to the car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition, but I managed to start the car and we drove away. As we sped down the dark, empty road, my phone buzzed one last time, another alert from the security app. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The camera showed the living room. There was someone standing there, in the middle of the room, watching us leave. I couldn't see their face, just a dark figure, standing still, like they were waiting for something. I drove straight to the police station, not stopping until we were inside, safe. The kids were scared, and I was a mess, trying to explain what happened. The police went to the house right away, but they didn't find anyone. The doors and windows were locked, just like I left them. But the window in the kids' room, the one I had locked, it was open again, They told me it was probably nothing, that maybe I just forgot to lock it. But I know I did. I know what I saw. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure in the living room, just standing there, watching, waiting. I don't know what they were planning, or why they didn't do anything while we were there, but I'm never babysitting again. Not after that night. Not after knowing that someone could have been inside the house with us the whole time, watching from the shadows. I woke up in a strange room, the air thick with a musty smell that made my stomach turn. My head pounded, each throb echoing inside my skull. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but everything remained blurry. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized I had no idea where I was or how I got here. I wasn't in my bed. This wasn't my home. The room was dimly lit by a weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were bare, old paint peeling off in patches. There was a small window high up, but it was covered with some kind of dark cloth, blocking out any light. My heart raced as I looked around, trying to find something familiar, something that could explain how I ended up here. But there was nothing. Just a bed, a chair, and a door that was slightly open, letting in a faint light from outside. I forced myself to sit up, ignoring the dizziness that came with it. My mouth was dry, and my throat ached like I hadn't drunk water in days. I needed to figure out what was happening. I stood up on shaky legs, the floor cold under my bare feet. Slowly, I made my way to the door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My mind was foggy, like I was waking up from a deep sleep, but I knew I had to stay focused. I needed to get out of here. As I reached the door, I noticed something on the small table beside the bed. My heart skipped a beat when I saw what it was, my phone. I grabbed it, but my hopes were immediately crushed when I saw that it was dead. No way to call for help. I put it in my pocket anyway, feeling a bit safer having it with me, even if it was useless right now. I pushed the door open a little more, careful not to make any noise. The hallway outside was dark, with only a single light bulb flickering at the far end. I could barely see anything, but it was enough to tell me I wasn't in a normal house. The walls were old, the floor creaking with every step I took. I had no idea where I was or where I should go, but staying in that room felt like a trap. I had to move. As I took a step into the hallway, something caught my eye. There, on a small table just outside the door, was my watch. My heart raced faster. Why was my stuff here, and why was it placed like this? Like someone had set it out for me. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and slipped it on my wrist. The watch felt heavy, grounding me, but it also made the situation feel even more unreal. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps, coming from somewhere down the hall. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them echoing in the narrow space, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. I needed to hide. I needed to disappear. Without thinking, I darted back into the room and closed the door just enough to leave a small crack. My breathing was loud in my ears, and I pressed a hand to my mouth to try and keep quiet. The footsteps were right outside the door now, and I could hear voices, muffled, but clear enough to tell they were talking about something serious. My name. I heard my name. Someone was looking for me, and it wasn't for anything good. I dropped to the floor, sliding under the bed as quietly as I could. The space was tight, dust filling my nose and making me want to sneeze, but I held it in. I had to. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and I could see the shadows of 2 pairs of feet through the crack. They were standing there, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught enough to understand the danger I was in. They were talking about finishing the job. My heart was beating so fast I thought they might hear it. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing, trying to stay calm. But all I could think about was what they meant by finishing the job. What had they done to me? What were they planning to do next? After what felt like hours, the footsteps moved away. The voices faded, and I heard a door open and close somewhere down the hall. Silence. But I didn't move. I stayed under the bed, too scared to come out, too scared that they might come back. But I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to get out of this place, whatever it was. I slowly slid out from under the bed, my body aching from the tension. I crept back to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. I took a deep breath and stepped out, trying to stay as quiet as possible. As I moved down the hall, I kept close to the wall, listening for any sign of those people. I had no plan, no idea where I was going, but I couldn't stop now. I passed by several doors, all closed, all silent. Then, halfway down the hall, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, there was a small bulletin board covered in photos. Photos of me. Some were old, some recent, but all of them had one thing in common: a red circle drawn around my face. My legs felt weak, and I grabbed onto the wall to keep from falling. Someone had been watching me, following me, planning this. I wasn't just here by accident. This was all planned. I didn't waste any more time. I started running, my feet slapping against the cold floor, not caring about the noise anymore. I needed to find a way out before they realized I was gone. I ran down the hall, around a corner, and there it was, a door leading outside. I pushed it open and stumbled out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I kept running, not looking back, just running. The ground was rough under my feet, but I didn't stop. I didn't know where I was or where I was going, but I had to keep moving. Then I heard it, a car engine starting somewhere behind me. I glanced back and saw headlights in the distance coming closer. They were coming after me. I pushed myself harder, running until my lungs burned, but the car was getting closer. I could hear it now, the sound of tires on gravel, the engine roaring. I couldn't outrun it, but I had to try. I had to keep going, had to find help, had to survive. The car was almost on me when I spotted a narrow path leading into the woods. I veered off the road and into the trees, hoping the car couldn't follow. But as I plunged into the darkness, I realized I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no idea where to go. The last thing I heard was the sound of the car door slamming and the faint voices calling out in the night. They were still looking for me, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I first bought the house, it seemed like a dream. A little old, sure, but with a lot of charm. The kind of place you could tell had a lot of history. The basement was the only part that felt off. It was cold, dark, and had a smell like old wood and something else I couldn't place. But I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just part of living in an old house. I had plans to fix it up eventually, so I didn't worry too much. The first few days were busy, unpacking and getting everything in order. I spent most of my time upstairs, avoiding the basement except when I had to. But then, one afternoon, I decided to start organizing the basement. I didn't have a lot of stuff, just a few boxes, but it was an excuse to finally get familiar with the space. The basement was cluttered with random things left by the previous owner: old furniture, rusty tools, and boxes of junk. As I was moving some boxes, I noticed something strange. One of the walls didn't look quite right. The paneling was different, and when I moved the boxes away, I found a small door hidden behind them. My heart started racing. It wasn't the kind of excitement I had felt when I bought the house. This was different, a mix of fear and curiosity. I opened the door slowly, and what I saw made me freeze. Inside the small room were old photographs, yellowed with age, showing people tied up and terrified. There were handwritten notes, rambling and disjointed, talking about cleansing and purging. Tools, too, hung on the walls. Tools that weren't meant for fixing anything. They were meant for hurting. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My first thought was to call the police, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe something deeper, but I decided not to. Not yet. I started digging through the evidence, trying to piece together the story of the previous owner. There was no name on anything, just the initials JT. But the more I read, the more I realized that this person had done horrible things. And from the dates on the notes and photos, it wasn't that long ago. I felt sick, but I also felt like I needed to know more. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop myself. As the days passed, I became obsessed with the hidden room. I would go down to the basement every day, reading more of the notes, trying to understand what had happened in my house. I stopped sleeping well. Every little noise in the house made me jump. Things started to go missing, small things at first, like keys or a book, but then bigger things, like a chair that was suddenly in a different place. I started to feel like I wasn't alone in the house. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a noise from the basement. It was a soft, shuffling sound, like someone moving around down there. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to get up and check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I reached the basement, everything looked the same. But then I saw them. Fresh footprints leading to the hidden room. I panicked. This was too much. Someone had been down here recently. Maybe they were still here. I turned to run back upstairs, but I heard it then. A voice, low and raspy, coming from behind me. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the darkness, but there was no one there. But the voice was real. I wasn't imagining it. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but as I dialed, I heard footsteps coming up the basement stairs, slow, deliberate. I dropped the phone, backing away from the door. I knew then that the previous homeowner, JT, had never left. They had been living here, hiding in the walls, in the spaces I hadn't yet explored. The door handle started to turn, and I knew I had to get out of the house. But I was frozen, trapped by fear. The door creaked open, and I saw a shadow step into the hallway. It was a figure, tall and thin, with a face that was twisted in a horrible smile. "You've seen too much," the figure said, the voice now clear and unmistakable. It was JT. I tried to move, to run, but it was too late. JT grabbed me, pulling me into the darkness. The last thing I remember is the cold, damp smell of the basement as everything went black. I woke up later, tied to a chair in the hidden room. JT was standing over me, holding one of those awful tools. I tried to scream, but it came out as a muffled cry. JT leaned in close, whispering in my ear. "No one ever leaves," they said, and I knew then that this was it. I was never going to escape. I don't know how long I've been down here now. Days? Weeks? Time has lost all meaning. JT keeps me alive, just barely, but I know it's only a matter of time before they finish what they started. If anyone ever finds this, please don't buy this house. Don't come here. And if you're already here, get out while you still can. I live in a small town where nothing much happens. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and things are quiet. I go about my daily routine without any surprises. Work, grocery shopping, maybe a walk in the park. But then something changed. I started noticing someone, a man, every time I went out. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. He seemed harmless enough, just another person walking by. But then, I began to notice him more and more. He was always there, no matter where I went. The grocery store, the park, even when I took different routes to work. It felt like he was always watching me. This went on for a few weeks. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just someone who lived nearby, and our schedules happened to match. But the feeling that he was watching me started to creep into my mind, making me feel uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling. One day, I saw him again, standing across the street from my apartment. This time, he was holding something, his phone. I saw the flash of the camera, and that's when I realized he was taking pictures of me. My heart started racing. I quickly turned and went inside, but the thought stayed with me. Why would someone be taking pictures of me? I tried to ignore it, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. Every time I saw him, he had his phone out, snapping pictures. The paranoia grew. I started changing my routines, taking different routes, going out at different times. But no matter what I did, he was always there, taking pictures. It was like he knew exactly where I would be. One evening, after weeks of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I was scared, frustrated, and tired of feeling hunted. So, I decided to confront him. I saw him standing near the park, phone in hand. I walked straight up to him, my hands trembling with anger and fear. "Why are you following me? Why are you taking pictures of me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his face calm, almost too calm. "I'm not following you," he said, in a low, steady voice. "I'm just documenting something unusual." "Unusual?" I was confused. "What's unusual about me? Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand why I was upset. "Because," he said slowly, "you've been dead for years." I stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. "What are you talking about?" "I'm right here. I'm not dead." But he didn't back down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some old photographs. They were faded, but I could make out the images. Me lying in a coffin, people standing around crying. It was a funeral, and it was mine. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. This is a joke, right?" "How did you get these pictures?" "It's not a joke," he replied calmly. "You died in a car accident years ago. I've been documenting this because, well, it's strange that you're here, walking around, living a life that isn't yours." I shook my head, backing away. "No, that's not possible. I'm alive. I have a job. I have friends. This isn't real." But the man just stood there, watching me, his expression never changing. The pictures were in my hand now, and as I looked closer, I recognized the people in them, my parents, my old friends. It was all there, and it made no sense. I ran home, my mind spinning. I needed answers. I started looking through old documents, photo albums, anything that could prove I was alive. But the more I looked, the more I found that matched what he said. Old newspaper clippings about a car accident, a death notice with my name, my face. I called my parents, but when I spoke to them, they sounded distant, almost scared. "We thought we lost you," my mother said, her voice trembling. "We had to let you go. But now, I don't know what to think." I didn't know what to think either. I went to visit old friends, people who had been close to me. They looked at me like I was a ghost. One of them even showed me a video from my funeral. It was real. The video, the pictures, the documents, they all told the same story. I had died years ago. But how could that be? I was standing right there, talking to them, breathing, feeling. I was alive, wasn't I? The days that followed were a blur. I stopped going to work, stopped leaving the house. I couldn't trust what was real anymore. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. The person in the reflection didn't feel like me. I started to question everything, my memories, my existence. I went back to the man one last time, desperate for answers. "What am I?" I asked him, my voice shaking. He looked at me with those same calm eyes and said, "I don't know. But whatever you are, you're not supposed to be here." That was the last time I saw him. Now I'm alone, with only the photos and documents to remind me of the life I once had, or thought I had. I don't know what's real anymore. Am I alive? Or am I just a memory that refuses to fade away? Every day, I wake up, look in the mirror, and wonder if today will be the day I disappear, or if I was never really here at all. Last weekend, some friends and I went camping deep in the woods. We wanted to escape the city, relax, and enjoy some fresh air. It was a place far from everything, the kind of place where your phone has no signal, and you feel like the only people in the world. The forest was thick, and the trees were tall, blocking most of the sunlight. At first, it felt peaceful, but as the day went on, the quiet started to feel too heavy. There was no sound except for our voices and the occasional rustling of leaves. When we arrived at the campsite, we set up our tents near a small clearing. The ground was soft, covered with fallen leaves, and there was a faint smell of earth and moss. We laughed, shared stories, and forgot about the stress of our daily lives. Everything seemed perfect. Later, while gathering firewood, I noticed something sticking out from under a pile of leaves. I thought it was just some trash at first, but when I cleared the leaves away, I saw it was an old camera. It looked like it had been there for a while, its casing scratched and a bit dirty. I called the others over, and we were all curious about it. Who would leave a camera out here? We decided to see if it still worked. Back at the campsite, we gathered around the camera, clicking through the photos. The first few were nothing special, just pictures of trees, rocks, and a stream. It seemed like someone had been hiking around here, taking random shots of nature. But then the photos started to get strange. We saw pictures of a campsite, one that looked very familiar. As we kept clicking, the photos began to show our campsite, but from a distance. With each new picture, the perspective got closer and closer until the photos were of us, sitting by the fire, setting up our tents, completely unaware. The last few pictures were the worst. They were taken from inside one of our tents, showing us as we slept. The photos were dark and a bit blurry, but we could clearly see our faces, relaxed and unaware of the camera. My heart raced as I realized what this meant. Someone had been here, watching us, while we were sleeping. The thought made my stomach turn. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I showed the photos to the others, and their faces went pale. We argued about what to do. Some wanted to leave immediately, but it was already getting dark, and driving through the forest at night didn't seem safe either. We checked around the campsite, looking for any signs of someone else being there, but found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing that would tell us where the person with the camera had gone. As night fell, the mood shifted from uneasy to downright terrifying. Every little sound made us jump. The crack of a twig, the rustling of leaves, even the wind felt sinister. We sat in a tight circle, backs to the fire, trying to convince ourselves that it was nothing, that we were safe. But we couldn't stop thinking about those photos. The night dragged on, and none of us could sleep. Every time one of us suggested leaving the tent to check outside, someone else would argue against it, scared of what we might find, or what might find us. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful during the day, now felt like it was closing in on us. The darkness outside was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence was broken only by our nervous breathing. At some point during the night, we heard it. A faint sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. It was close, just outside our tent. We froze, listening, our breaths held in fear. The sound stopped, but the tension didn't ease. We were too scared to move, too scared to look outside, to see if someone was really out there. When the first light of dawn finally appeared, the fear started to lift, but only slightly. The night had been long, too long, and we were all exhausted. I knew we couldn't stay there any longer. I had to see what was outside. My hands were shaking as I unzipped the tent. The others watched, their faces pale and eyes wide. The air outside was cold, and the morning mist hung low over the ground. I stepped out, half expecting to find nothing. But then I saw them, fresh footprints in the soft earth, leading away from our campsite. The tracks were deep, like whoever made them had been standing there for a while watching us. Then I noticed the camera. It was sitting right outside our tent, just lying there as if placed on purpose for us to find. My heart dropped when I picked it up, my fingers numb with fear. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned it on, my breath catching in my throat as I clicked through the photos. There were new pictures taken just hours ago of us lying awake in fear, eyes wide open, faces twisted in terror. Whoever it was had been there all night, watching us as we sat in the tent, paralyzed by fear. They were so close, and we never knew. We didn't pack up properly. We just grabbed our things and ran to the car, leaving the campsite as quickly as we could. The drive back was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to process what had happened. None of us spoke about it afterward. I haven't been able to sleep well since, and every time I close my eyes, I see those photos, our terrified faces staring back at me. It wasn't until later that I realized something. The last photo on the camera wasn't of us lying awake. It was of the camera itself, taken from a distance, as if someone wanted to make sure we found it. It started about 3 weeks ago. I found a letter in my mailbox, handwritten and addressed to me. I thought it was strange because nobody writes letters anymore. It didn't have a return address, just my name on the front. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It described my day in detail, the exact time I left for work, the coffee shop where I bought my usual morning latte, even the blue shirt I wore that day. The writer said they enjoyed watching me and promised to write again soon. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe one of my friends messing with me. But as I read the letter over and over, something felt off. The way the person wrote, the way they talked about watching me, it didn't seem like a joke. But I tried to laugh it off. I even showed it to a couple of my friends who teased me about having a secret admirer. I wanted to believe them, so I pushed the uneasy feeling aside. But then, the letters kept coming. Every couple of days there'd be a new one. Each one was more detailed, more personal. The writer knew things they shouldn't. What I had for dinner, the conversation I had on the phone with my mom, the fact that I'd started running in the evenings. They even knew about the small scar on my ankle, something I never talked about. It was like they were inside my life, inside my head. Then, the tone of the letters changed. They weren't just descriptions anymore. They started including threats, subtle at first, but growing bolder with each letter. The writer said they were getting closer, that soon they'd be able to touch me. I didn't know what to do. I started looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched all the time. Every shadow, every noise made me jump. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but the fear was becoming too real to ignore. I decided to find out who was doing this. I started with my neighbors, asking if they'd seen anything strange or noticed anyone hanging around. Most of them just gave me strange looks or brushed me off. But one of them, an older man named Mr. Carlson, told me to be careful. He said he'd seen a man sitting in a car outside my building late at night, When I asked for more details, he just shrugged and said he wasn't sure. But it was enough to make me even more scared. I also talked to people at work, trying to see if anyone knew about my private life, details that could match what was in the letters. But nobody seemed to know anything. I even started doubting my friends, wondering if one of them could be playing a sick game. But every time I brought it up, they just laughed and said I was being crazy. I was alone in this. Then one day, I found a letter inside my apartment. I remember locking the door that morning, double-checking it before I left for work. But when I came back, there it was, sitting on my kitchen counter. My heart pounded as I picked it up. The letter said the same things as before, about how they were watching me, how they knew everything about me. But this time, it mentioned things in my apartment, things nobody could know unless they'd been inside. It talked about the picture of my family on the nightstand, the book I'd left open on the coffee table. The last line said, "I'll be even closer soon." That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises, creaks in the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, sounds that had always been there but now seemed sinister. I checked the locks on my doors and windows 3 times before I finally sat down on my couch, clutching a kitchen knife in my hand. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal, waiting for something to happen, for the person to make their move. The next morning, I found another letter. It was slipped under my door. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was simple: tonight. I couldn't breathe. I called the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They said it could be a prank and that I should try to stay calm. But how could I stay calm? Someone was out there, someone who had been inside my home, someone who knew everything about me. I didn't know what to do. I called a friend and begged them to come over, but they were out of town. I was alone, completely alone. As the day went on, I felt like I was losing my mind. Every minute felt like an hour. Every shadow felt like a threat. I tried to prepare myself, to be ready for whatever was coming. I checked the locks again, blocked the windows with furniture, and kept the knife close. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whoever was doing this was already too close, already inside my life. The sun went down, and I sat in the dark, listening, waiting. The clock on the wall ticked louder with each passing second. My heart raced in time with it. I heard footsteps outside my door, but when I looked through the peephole, there was nobody there. Then, just as I was about to call the police again, the power went out. My apartment was plunged into darkness. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear, but eventually I heard a sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. A scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from inside the apartment. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the knife. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing happened. After what felt like hours, I finally dared to move. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A letter, sitting on the floor in front of me. I hadn't heard anyone come in, hadn't seen anyone, but there it was, just like all the others. I picked it up, my hands cold with fear, and slowly unfolded the paper. The message was short, just 3 words. I'm already here. I dropped the letter, my mind racing. Was this real? Was someone in the apartment with me? Or had I finally lost it? I don't know what's true anymore. All I know is that I'm not safe, not anywhere, and I don't think I'll ever be safe again. It was late, and the streets were almost empty. I was walking home after a long day at work, the same route I took every night. It was usually peaceful, even comforting, with the soft glow of streetlights and the quiet hum of the city in the background. But tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was just because I was tired, or maybe because the street seemed quieter than usual. The only sound I could hear was the echo of my footsteps on the pavement. As I walked, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping up on me. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the further I walked, the stronger the feeling grew. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing there, just empty streets and darkened windows. I turned a corner, and that's when I saw it. A white van, moving slowly down the street towards me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a van, probably someone going home, just like me. But as it got closer, I noticed something strange. The van was moving too slowly, almost as if it was following me. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the next intersection before it caught up to me. But the van kept pace with me, its engine humming quietly. My heart started to race, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I was almost at the corner when the van pulled up beside me and stopped. The door slid open with a smooth, quiet motion, revealing the dimly lit interior. I couldn't see much inside, just shadows, and the faint outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. "Get in," a voice said, calm but firm. I froze, my mind racing. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. The van's engine was still running, the door open, waiting for me to make a move. I knew I had to do something, but fear was holding me in place, like a hand squeezing my throat. I finally snapped out of it, my survival instinct kicking in. I could either get in the van, which seemed like a death sentence, or I could run. I chose to run. I turned and sprinted down the street, my heart pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of tires screeching behind me told me the van was following, matching my every move. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, hoping, praying that I could outrun it. But the van was fast, too fast. It was right on my heels, and I knew I couldn't keep this up for long. My legs were burning. My lungs felt like they were going to burst, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. I spotted a narrow alleyway up ahead and made a split-second decision. I veered off the main road and dashed into the alley, hoping the van wouldn't be able to follow. The alley was dark, and I could barely see where I was going. My feet slipped on the wet pavement, and I nearly fell, but I managed to keep my balance. The van couldn't follow me here, but that didn't mean I was safe. The alley was a dead end, and there was nowhere to hide. I was trapped. I could hear the van stop at the entrance of the alley. The engine cut off, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the narrow passage. Someone was coming, and there was nowhere for me to go. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible, hoping that somehow they wouldn't see me. The footsteps got closer, and I could see the outline of a figure moving towards me in the darkness. I was shaking, my mind racing with all the terrible things that could happen next. This was it. I was going to die here, alone, in this dark alley. But just as the figure reached me, something unexpected happened. A door in the alley opened, and a man stepped out, carrying a trash bag. He looked at me, then at the person approaching, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The man with the trash bag called out something I couldn't understand, and the figure stopped, hesitating. I don't know if it was the sudden appearance of another person or something else, but the figure turned and ran back towards the van. I heard the door slam shut, and then the engine roared to life. The van sped away, leaving me standing there, shaking and barely able to breathe. The man with the trash bag looked at me with concern, asking if I was okay. I nodded, but I was too shaken to speak. He offered to call the police, and I could only nod again. My hands were trembling as I tried to pull out my phone, but I couldn't even hold it steady. When the police arrived, I told them everything I could remember, which wasn't much. The van, the voice, the footsteps. But there wasn't much they could do. The van was gone, and the person who had tried to grab me was nowhere to be found. They took my statement, gave me a ride home, and told me to be careful. But even after I was back in the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. What if they came back? What if they found me again? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the van, heard the voice telling me to get in. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never feel safe walking home alone at night again. Last night, I drove home after a long shift. I was exhausted, my eyes heavy, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark. I'd taken this route many times before, a quiet rural road that cut through miles of farmland. At night, it was almost peaceful, just me and the road. But last night, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt lonely. And as the minutes passed, a strange unease settled in my chest. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on tiredness. The road was barely lit, only the faint glow from my headlights slicing through the darkness. Trees loomed on either side, their branches casting shadows that seemed to move in the corner of my eye. I told myself to focus on getting home, that I'd be in bed soon. I even turned up the radio, but the static between channels only added to the strange feeling growing inside me. I reached over to switch it off when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. At first, it was just a pair of headlights far behind, a tiny dot of light in the distance. I didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon for another car to be on the road, though it was rare this late at night. But as the seconds ticked by, those headlights grew closer and closer until they were right behind me, almost blinding in the mirror. I frowned, wondering why the driver didn't pass me. The road was empty, plenty of room to overtake if they were in a hurry. I signaled to change lanes, giving them space to pass, but they didn't. Instead, they stayed glued to my bumper, their headlights flooding my car with harsh, white light. My heart started to race. I tried speeding up, hoping they'd get the hint and go around, but they matched my speed, staying just inches from my car. I felt trapped, pinned in by this faceless driver, and the dread I'd felt earlier began to morph into something colder, sharper. I tried to think logically. Maybe they were just some impatient driver. Maybe they didn't even realize how close they were. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, realizing I had at least another 20 minutes before I reached home, before I could escape this unsettling situation. I pushed down on the accelerator, speeding up. The engine roared in response, but the other car kept up with me, its lights still blinding. I could feel my breath quicken, my hands growing slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. Not that I was surprised. This part of the road was notorious for poor reception. What did they want? Why were they doing this? I tried to stay calm, telling myself I could handle this, that they'd get bored and leave me alone. But the longer it went on, the more my panic grew. I started taking turns I hadn't planned, trying to lose them. But every time I thought I'd shaken them off, they reappeared in my mirror, closer than before. The road was a blur as I sped along, the fear in my chest threatening to choke me. Every thought in my head screamed to get away, to find somewhere safe, but there was nowhere to go. I couldn't risk pulling over, couldn't stop and face whatever or whoever was in that car behind me. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. I kept driving, pushing my car faster than I ever had, praying I'd find a way out. But the road seemed endless, every turn just leading to more darkness. Then, up ahead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A dead end. The road just stopped, blocked by a heavy metal gate. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Behind me, the other car slowed to a stop as well, its headlights still on, casting long, eerie shadows. I locked the doors, my eyes glued to the mirror. My hands shook as I watched the driver's door of the other car open, and a figure stepped out. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world. My heart pounded harder, each step they took echoing in my head. And then I saw their face. For a second, I couldn't believe it. It was someone I knew. But instead of relief, a deep, sickening fear settled in my stomach. The look in their eyes was cold, so different from the person I thought I knew. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself there was some other explanation, but the truth was too clear. They weren't here by accident. They'd followed me, hunted me down, and now there was no way out. The last thing I remember is the sound of their knuckles tapping on the driver's window, slow and methodical, like they were savoring every second of my fear. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the darkness outside seemed to close in around me. The dread that had been simmering all night finally boiled over, and I realized with a chilling clarity that this wasn't some random encounter. It was planned, personal. I don't know how it ended because in that moment everything went black. All I'm left with is the memory of those headlights, that face, and the overwhelming terror that washed over me in the end. I wish I could say it was just a nightmare, but I know it wasn't. I still see those headlights sometimes, in my rearview mirror, and I wonder if they're coming back for me. I know this sounds impossible, but I got a call last night from my own number. It was my voice on the other end, but it wasn't me talking. The voice was panicked, almost breathless, telling me to get out of the house right away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and at first I thought it was some kind of joke, maybe one of those weird phone scams. But then the voice said my name, and it was like hearing a scream in the quiet. I just froze, trying to figure out how my phone could be calling me and how I was hearing myself, but the urgency in the voice left me too scared to think straight. The call ended suddenly, leaving only silence in the room. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. But something about the house felt off. It was too quiet, and that kind of silence always gets to me, you know? Like the whole place is holding its breath. The fear started to creep in, and I began to notice things I hadn't before. A floorboard creaked down the hall, even though I was alone. I thought I heard whispering, but it was so faint, I convinced myself I was imagining it. My heartbeat quickened, and I felt the walls closing in on me. Every small noise, a tap from the heater, the rustle of the curtains, felt like a threat. I tried to tell myself that the voice wasn't real, that it was just a trick of the mind, but the fear wouldn't go away. I checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. When I passed by the mirror in the hallway, I nearly jumped out of my skin. For a split second, I thought I saw something move behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. That was when I decided to call the number back. Maybe hearing a busy signal or a call failed message would help me make sense of what had just happened. But when I tried, the call wouldn't go through. My phone just kept flashing, "Call failed," over and over again. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me. My hands were shaking when I tried to call my best friend, just to have someone to talk to. Maybe they could tell me I was overreacting. But the moment the call connected, it wasn't my friend's voice I heard. It was mine, again, pleading with me to leave. My own voice, but more desperate, as if the warning was my last chance. I dropped the phone, terrified, and heard the call end with a dead tone. Panic set in. I ran through the house, checking every room, looking for any sign of an intruder. But there was nothing. No one. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The voice on the phone wasn't just a prank. It was trying to protect me, to warn me about something I couldn't see. I tried to piece together what was going on, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I started to remember all the strange things that had happened recently. A neighbor disappeared last week without a trace. The mailman had been acting weird, staring at my house for too long. And then there were the footsteps outside my door late at night, the ones I had written off as just someone passing by. Now everything seemed connected, like a puzzle I was only starting to see. I didn't want to wait any longer. Whatever was going on, I needed to get out of the house. I grabbed my coat and keys, my heart racing, and headed for the door. But just as I reached for the handle, my phone rang again. The screen showed my own number, and I nearly dropped it. I knew I shouldn't answer, but I did, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This time, the voice was different. It was calm, almost like it had accepted something terrible. "It's too late," my voice said, cold and final. And then, before I could react, the door in front of me slammed shut like someone had pushed it with all their strength. I stumbled back, dropping the phone, my mind racing. I was trapped. The house felt like a living thing, closing in on me, sealing off any chance of escape. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the house swallowed my voice. I ran to the windows, but they wouldn't budge. It was like the whole place had turned against me, locking me in with whatever was waiting. And that voice, my voice, echoed in my head. "It's too late." I don't know what's going to happen now. The house is so quiet, but I feel like I'm being watched, like something is waiting for me to let my guard down. I keep expecting the phone to ring again, but at the same time, I'm terrified of what I'll hear if it does. All I know is that I was never supposed to leave. The warning, the calls, they were all leading to this moment, trapping me in a place I thought was safe. I'm still here, waiting for whatever comes next, but deep down, I think I already know. The real danger was never outside. It was always here, inside, with me. And now, there's no way out. The backseat passenger. After my night shift ended, I couldn't wait to get home. I worked long hours at the warehouse, and by the time my shift ended, it was past midnight. My body felt heavy, and my mind was foggy from the hours of labor. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars left in the far corners. The streetlights flickered above, casting weak shadows on the ground. I approached my car, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking a little, probably from the cold, I told myself. I was too tired to care about much else. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, closing the door with a heavy thud. As soon as I sat down, I felt a strange sensation, like I was not alone. But I shook it off. I was just tired. I started the car and drove out of the lot onto the quiet streets that led to my apartment. It was a familiar route, one I could probably drive with my eyes closed. My mind started to wander as I drove. I thought about the day's work, my aching muscles, and whether I had locked the car when I left work. I wasn't sure, and the thought bugged me for a second before I brushed it aside. But the feeling of being watched was growing. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror. It was dark in the back seat, just a shadowy mass, nothing unusual. I blamed my nerves on the late hour and the quiet. The night was too silent, and it made me uneasy. I turned onto a narrow, dimly lit street. That's when I heard it. The faintest rustling sound coming from behind me. It was so soft I almost didn't hear it. My heart started beating faster. I glanced in the mirror again, but all I could see was the same darkness. Nothing seemed out of place. Maybe it was just something sliding in the trunk, I thought. I tried to calm myself, but the tension wouldn't leave. The rustling came again, a little louder this time. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and my eyes darted to the rearview mirror. I still saw nothing. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe a bag or something had shifted back there. But I knew I hadn't put anything in the back seat. I felt my pulse quicken, and I decided to pull over. My rational mind told me I was being ridiculous, that I was just tired, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling anymore. I needed to check to be sure. I pulled the car to the side of the road, the tires crunching on the gravel. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Then, I slowly turned around to face the back seat. At first, I saw nothing, just the dark interior of the car as expected. I almost laughed at myself for being so paranoid. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A shadow in the back, huddled low, hiding. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded in my chest and I froze. There was someone in my car. I could see them now, a figure crouched in the shadows, trying to stay hidden. Panic flooded my body. My mind went blank, except for one thought. I was not alone. I forced myself to speak, though my voice came out shaky and weak. Who are you? What do you want? There was a long pause, and then the figure slowly raised their head. I couldn't see their face clearly in the darkness, but I could feel their eyes on me. The silence in the car was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move, didn't say a word. They just watched me. I knew I had to do something, but I was too scared to move. My thoughts were a jumble of fear and confusion. Why were they here? How long had they been there? What did they want from me? Then, in a low, almost whispering voice, the figure finally spoke. I've been watching you for a while. A chill ran down my spine. The voice was calm, too calm, like they weren't afraid of anything. I didn't know what to say. My mind was blank with fear. I just stared at the shadowy figure, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. What do you want? I asked again, this time more desperate, more afraid. The figure leaned forward slightly, still hidden in the darkness. Just a ride, they said. But there was something in their tone, something that told me they were lying. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing, trying to find a way out, but every thought seemed to lead to a dead end. Then, almost by instinct, I made a decision. Without thinking, I turned the key, and the car roared back to life. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the car lurching forward. The figure in the back seat was thrown off balance, and in that moment, I reached for the door handle. I knew I had only seconds. I yanked the door open and jumped out, the car still moving. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto the gravel as the car sped away, the door swinging shut behind me. I scrambled to my feet, my body aching from the fall, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if they were following me. I just ran as fast as I could, towards the nearest lights, the nearest sign of life. When I finally reached safety, I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back down the road, but my car was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I was safe, but the terror lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come, how easily it could have ended differently. I never saw my car again. The police found it abandoned a few miles away, but the person who had been in the back seat was gone, like they had never been there. But I know they were. I can still feel their eyes on me, even now when I drive at night. I'll never forget that feeling, the cold fear that I was not alone. And I'll always check my back seat from now on, because you never know who might be waiting in the shadows. I woke up in the dark, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, pressing down on your chest. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, but the coldness in the room told me otherwise. Then I saw it, a figure, standing at the foot of my bed, just watching me. My heart skipped, then started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to scream, but fear held me silent. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was a trick of the shadows, but I could see the outline, the slight movement of breath. Finally, panic broke through the fear. I screamed, a sound that seemed to echo in the stillness. In that split second, the figure vanished. Not like someone running away, but just gone. The darkness swallowed it. I scrambled to turn on the bedside lamp, my hands shaking so badly that it took 3 tries before the light flicked on. The room was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I forced myself to sit up, to look around, to convince myself that I had imagined it. But then I saw the note, a small white piece of paper lying on the bed where the figure had stood. I didn't want to touch it. My hand hovered above it for a long time before I finally picked it up. The paper was cold, as if it had been left in the freezer. There were only 2 words written on it. Tomorrow's date. My blood ran cold. This was real. Someone had been in my room, and they had left this for me. I locked every door, every window. I checked them twice, 3 times, but I found nothing out of place. It didn't make sense. I lived alone, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor. No one could get in without me knowing. But I wasn't safe. I could feel it in my bones. I stayed awake the rest of the night, every creak of the building, every gust of wind making me jump. I kept the lights on, staring at the clock, watching the minutes crawl by. The sun finally rose, and I thought I would feel better. But the fear didn't go away. I was tired, but sleep was out of the question. The note was still in my hand, the date staring up at me. It was today now. What was going to happen? I tried to push the thought away, to focus on anything else, but it lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. I tried to go about my day like normal, but it wasn't normal. Nothing was normal anymore. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there, watching me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just emptiness. I jumped at every sound, the phone ringing, a car horn outside, even the wind against the windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was waiting, just out of sight. As the day went on, the fear only grew. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad joke, that someone was messing with me. But who would do that? And how did they get in? I didn't have answers, just questions that made my head spin. I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. The clock on the wall seemed to move faster and faster, like it was counting down to something. By the time night fell again, I was a mess. I locked the doors and windows again, even though I knew it didn't matter. Whoever had left that note had gotten in before. They could do it again. I sat in bed, clutching my phone, ready to call for help if I heard anything. The lights were on, but they didn't make me feel any safer. The shadows seemed to dance around the edges of the room, taunting me. I kept checking the time, the numbers on the clock glowing like a bad omen. Midnight came and went, and nothing happened. But that didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made the fear worse. What if the note was just the beginning? What if something worse was coming? I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion finally caught up with me. My eyes kept closing, my head nodding down. But every time I started to drift off, a noise would jolt me awake. A floorboard creaking, the wind against the window, or maybe just my own breath. Somehow, morning came. I opened my eyes to the first light of dawn creeping through the curtains. Nothing had happened. I was still here, still alive. But the fear hadn't gone away. It had settled into my bones, a part of me now. I looked down at the note, crumpled in my hand, and a chill ran through me. I didn't know what to think anymore. Was the stranger real, or had my mind created them in the dark? But the note was real. I could feel it, cold and solid in my hand. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was dread. I wasn't safe. That much I knew for sure. I didn't know what was coming next, but I could feel it, like a storm building on the horizon. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that I could wake up and it would all be over. But I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, and the note was still there, a reminder that someone had been in my room, that they had watched me sleep, and they could come back. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood. It's a peaceful place, the kind of area where people wave hello but don't ask too many questions. My routine is simple: work, home, dinner, sleep, repeat. I never thought much about safety. I always lock the doors and windows, but it's more out of habit than fear. Nothing ever happens here. It was a Saturday morning when I found the package at my doorstep. No return address, no name on it, just a plain brown box, small enough to hold in one hand. I wasn't expecting anything, so I stood there for a moment, just staring at it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took it inside. I set the box on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, there was a stack of photos. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The first picture showed me lying in my bed, asleep. The angle was strange, like it had been taken from the corner of my room. I flipped to the next one, and my heart sank. It was another photo of me sleeping, but from a different angle. As I went through the stack, I realized these photos were all taken inside my house, from different spots around my bedroom. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands started to shake, and I dropped the photos on the table. How could this be possible? I live alone, I thought. No one should be able to take these pictures. Someone had been inside my house while I was sleeping. I ran to the front door, checking the lock. It was secure. I checked all the windows and the back door. Everything was locked, just as I had left it. My mind raced with questions. Had someone broken in while I was at work? But nothing was missing. Everything looked the same, except for these photos. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just a prank. Maybe one of my friends was messing with me, although I couldn't think of anyone who would do something like this. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Every creak in the house made me jump. I started to notice small things, like objects slightly out of place, things I was sure I hadn't moved. The unease settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. The next morning, another package was at my door. This time, my hands trembled as I opened it. More photos, but these were even worse. They were taken from right next to my bed. One of them showed my face up close, with my eyes closed, peaceful, unaware. The idea that someone was standing so close to me, watching me sleep, made me feel sick. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went out and bought security cameras, setting them up all over the house. That night, I barely slept. Every sound amplified in the dark. When I finally drifted off, it was with one eye open, waiting for something to happen. The following days were hell. The cameras didn't pick up anything unusual, but more packages kept arriving. The photos became more invasive, more disturbing. In one of them, my hand was hanging off the bed, and I could see a shadow in the background. I was losing my grip on reality, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was always there, just out of sight. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pictures, that shadow in the corner of my room. I didn't know who to trust. I even started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I was losing my mind, imagining things that weren't there. One night, I woke up with a start. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know why. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the foot of my bed, holding a camera. The room was too dark to see their face, but I could feel their eyes on me. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. The figure didn't say anything. They just stood there. And then I heard the click of the camera. The flash went off, blinding me for a second. When the light faded, the figure was gone. The room was silent again, but I knew it hadn't been a dream. On the floor, where the figure had been standing, was the camera. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to know. I picked it up, and there was a new roll of film inside. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I packed a bag and left that night, moving to a new place in a different part of town. I changed the locks, put up more cameras, and tried to forget what had happened. But the packages found me again. It didn't matter where I went or how many times I moved. They always found me. Now, I live in a constant state of fear. I'm afraid to sleep, afraid of what I might see when I wake up. Every time I close my eyes, I expect to see that figure standing over me, ready to take another picture. The flash from that camera haunts me, burning into my memory. I've tried everything to stop it, but I know it's not over. It's never going to be over. So here I am, sharing this with you. I don't know what else to do. If anyone has any idea what's happening to me, please tell me. I can't keep living like this, always waiting for the next flash, the next package. I'm scared that one day I won't wake up at all. I should have just stuck to the main road, but I was in a rush to get home. It was late, and I was tired. My job, it takes a lot out of me. Today was worse than usual. A coworker had called in sick, and I ended up doing double the work. By the time I left the office, the streets were mostly empty, and all I wanted was to collapse on my bed. I knew a shortcut through an alley that would save me at least 10 minutes. I'd taken it a few times before, though always during the day. But tonight, it felt different. As soon as I stepped into the alley, I noticed how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that makes you feel like something isn't right. The streetlights were dim, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. I told myself to keep walking. The quicker I got through, the quicker I'd be home. But with each step, the alley seemed to stretch further, like it didn't want to let me go. The buildings on either side looked older, more run down than I remembered. The walls were covered in graffiti that I didn't recognize, and the windows were either boarded up or shattered. I started to feel uneasy. Something about this place felt off, like I was somewhere I shouldn't be. But I shook it off, blaming it on exhaustion. I just needed to get home. But when I tried to retrace my steps, the path behind me seemed different. The twists and turns I had just taken were no longer there, replaced by unfamiliar streets that shouldn't exist. Panic began to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I had just taken a wrong turn somewhere. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but the GPS wasn't working. The screen showed nothing but a blank grid, as if this place didn't even exist. That's when I heard it, the distant sound of a scream. It was faint, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped walking, straining to listen. But as soon as I stopped, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I whipped around, but there was no one there, just shadows shifting in the dim light. I started walking faster, my heart pounding in my chest, but the footsteps followed me, always stopping when I stopped. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, But the fear in my gut told me otherwise. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the alley narrowing with every step I took. The streets ahead looked unfamiliar, like they belonged to a different part of town, or maybe a different time. I knocked on a door, hoping someone could help me, but no one answered. I tried another and another, but it was the same. Either there was no one inside or they just didn't want to answer. The windows of the houses were dark, as if the whole place was abandoned. I felt a surge of panic. I needed to get out of here, now. But every turn I took led me deeper into the maze. It was like the alley was playing tricks on me, changing every time I looked away. I started running, my breath coming in short gasps. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. And then I saw it. A figure, standing at the end of the street, just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. I wanted to call out, to ask for help, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way the figure stood, so still, almost like it was waiting for me. Before I could decide what to do, the figure vanished into the shadows, as if it had never been there at all. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had to get out of here. I started running again, not caring where I was going, just trying to get away. But the more I ran, the more lost I became. The streets twisted and turned, leading me in circles, always bringing me back to the same place. I was trapped, and the shadows were closing in. In my panic, I saw what looked like the main road up ahead. Relief washed over me, and I sprinted towards it. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't the main road at all. It was the same alley I had started in. The buildings looked the same. The graffiti was the same. I was back where I started, but there was no way that was possible. The shadows around me felt like they were moving, like they were alive, reaching out to grab me. I was out of breath, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out of here. I pulled out my phone again, desperate to call for help, but the screen was dead. The battery had died just when I needed it most. That's when I heard the footsteps again, this time closer, much closer. I turned around, but the alley was empty, or at least it looked that way. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, coming from behind me, from all around me. I felt trapped, cornered by something I couldn't see. I ran, not sure where I was going, just trying to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps kept pace, never letting me out of their reach. I felt like I was being hunted, like prey in a game I didn't understand. And then, just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, the footsteps stopped. I paused, looking around, but there was nothing there, just shadows, deeper and darker than before. I took a step forward and then another, but the silence was worse than the footsteps. It was the silence of something waiting, something patient. I turned around, thinking I might try another way, but I froze. There, standing in the middle of the alley, was the figure again. Closer this time, and I could see it more clearly. But before I could react, the lights flickered, and everything went dark. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the sound of footsteps, getting closer and closer. When I matched with him on the app, everything seemed perfect, maybe a little too perfect now that I think about it. We chatted for weeks, just casual stuff at first. He was funny, polite, and didn't push for too much too soon. I was careful, of course, only giving away basic details. We talked about our jobs, favorite movies, and what we like to do on weekends. Nothing personal, nothing that could be used against me. But it felt right. He had this way of making me laugh, and it didn't take long before I started looking forward to our conversations. It wasn't just small talk anymore. We talked about life, dreams, and regrets. So when he suggested we meet in person, I was nervous, but excited. It felt like the next natural step. We agreed on a small cafe in a town not far from mine, a public place where I felt safe. The day of the meeting, I was anxious, but in a good way. I kept thinking about what he'd be like in person. Would he be as funny, as charming? I arrived a few minutes early, hoping to compose myself before he got there. But when I walked in, I saw him already seated at a corner table, waiting. He smiled as soon as he saw me, and for a moment, I felt all my nerves disappear. We ordered coffee and started talking, just like we had online. But something was off. He knew things, small things that I was sure I never mentioned, like where I worked, the name of my boss, even the street I lived on. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I had mentioned them and just forgot. But then he started talking about more specific details, like my favorite spot in the park where I like to read on Sundays, or the time my car broke down last month. Things that didn't come up in our chats. I tried to stay calm, to keep the conversation going, but I could feel the unease growing inside me. The way he talked, it was like he had been there with me, watching me. When I asked how he knew all these things, he just smiled and said he was good at guessing. But his eyes told a different story. They were too knowing, too confident. As the conversation went on, I started to feel trapped. He kept bringing up more details, more memories that weren't his to know. I couldn't understand how he knew so much about me. My daily routine, the clothes I wore on specific days, even the layout of my apartment. It was like he had been inside my life without me knowing. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. My hands were trembling under the table, but I forced myself to stay composed. I didn't want him to see how scared I was. I asked him again, more forcefully this time, how he knew so much. His smile didn't fade. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. He told me he had been following me for months, watching me from a distance, sometimes closer than I would ever imagine. He admitted to being inside my apartment, going through my things while I was at work. My heart was pounding in my chest, every instinct telling me to get out of there. I pushed back my chair, ready to leave. But before I could stand up, he grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, too tight, and I could see the change in his expression. The polite mask was gone, replaced with something darker, something obsessed. He told me we were meant to be together, that all he wanted was to be close to me. I yanked my arm free and stumbled out of the cafe, my mind racing. I didn't look back, just kept walking as fast as I could, putting as much distance between us as possible. I didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, engine running. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove straight to the police station. I had to report this, had to make sure he couldn't come near me again. But when I told them what happened, they didn't seem to take me seriously. They asked for details, like his name or contact information, but I realized I didn't know much about him beyond what we talked about online. When they checked the cafe's surveillance footage, there was nothing, no sign of him, like he never existed. They suggested it could have been a misunderstanding, maybe a prank. I felt like I was losing my mind. They took my statement, but I could tell they weren't convinced anything real had happened. I went home that night, locking every door, every window, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I hardly slept, jumping at every noise, every shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was simple, just 3 words. I miss you. I stared at the screen, my heart racing again. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. I called the police, but there was nothing they could do. No proof, no way to trace the message. It was like he was a ghost, slipping through the cracks of my life. Now, I live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. I moved to a new place, changed my number, deleted all my social media. But it doesn't matter. I know he's still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to step back into my life. And the worst part? I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's a way to process what happened, or maybe I just need to put it somewhere so I don't feel like I'm going crazy. I'm not even sure I'm okay right now. Everything is still too fresh in my mind, and every small sound around me makes my heart race. But I need to tell this story. It was a normal evening, just like any other. I was home alone, in my small house on the outskirts of town. I like it here because it's quiet and away from the busy streets. The air feels cleaner, and at night I can hear the wind in the trees and the occasional car passing in the distance. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to find something to watch. The house was warm and comfortable, and I felt completely at ease. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the door. It was so faint that I almost didn't hear it. I paused, listening, but there was nothing else. Maybe it was the wind or the house settling. I shrugged it off and went back to the TV. But then it happened again. The same soft knock, just a bit louder this time. I felt a slight unease in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. I walked over to the door, thinking maybe it was a delivery or someone stopping by. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. The yard was empty, and the street light outside cast long shadows, but there was no sign of anyone. I told myself it was nothing, just some kids playing a prank, or maybe I was hearing things. But I locked the door, just in case, and returned to the couch. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though. My mind kept drifting back to that knock, and I found it hard to focus on the TV. A few minutes later, the knock came again, louder this time. My heart started to race. I tried to stay calm, but something about it felt wrong. I went to the door again, peeking through the window first. Still, there was no one there. The street was empty, and the yard was quiet. But the knocking didn't stop. It was persistent, almost angry now. I checked all the windows, making sure they were locked, and then I stood in the hallway, listening. The knocking echoed through the house, filling every corner. It felt like it was inside my head, getting louder and louder until I couldn't think of anything else. I started to feel scared, really scared. It wasn't just the knocking anymore. I began to hear other noises, soft footsteps, a whisper here and there, but I couldn't figure out where they were coming from. I walked from room to room, trying to find the source, but every time I thought I was close, the noise would stop, and I'd be left standing in silence. The knocking was driving me crazy. It wasn't just at the door anymore. It felt like it was coming from the walls, the windows, everywhere. I could feel my sanity slipping, like I was losing control. I didn't know what was real and what wasn't anymore. My heart was pounding so hard that it hurt, and my breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. Then suddenly, it all stopped. The knocking, the whispers, the footsteps. Everything went silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The house was still, like it was holding its breath. That's when I noticed it. The small scratches on the door, the faint footprints in the dirt outside. Someone had been there. Someone real. They had been watching me, playing with me, seeing how far they could push me before I broke. The fear hit me all at once, like a punch to the gut. My legs went weak, and I had to hold on to the wall to keep from collapsing. But the worst part was the silence. It wasn't a relief. It was terrifying. The knocking had stopped, but I knew deep down that it wasn't over. I could feel it. Whoever had been outside wasn't out there anymore. They were inside, somewhere in the house with me. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric, every tiny sound made me jump. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy book, and held it in front of me like a weapon. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold on to it. Then I heard it, a soft creak from the hallway. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew I had to face whoever was there. I had no choice. My whole body was trembling as I took a step forward, then another, the floor creaking under my feet. I reached the hallway and stood at the entrance, listening. There was nothing at first, just the sound of my own breathing. But then, from around the corner, I heard it. A soft, slow exhale, like someone trying to keep quiet. I gripped the book tighter, and with every ounce of courage I had left, I stepped around the corner. But before I could see anything, the lights went out, plunging the house into darkness. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in the pitch-black silence. And then, in the darkness, I felt it. Hot breath on the back of my neck. That's where it ends. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I'm still there in that hallway, stuck in that moment of pure terror. I don't know if I'm safe or if it's still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. All I know is I'll never feel safe in my own home again. Last night, something happened to me that I still can't believe. I feel like I'm trapped in a nightmare, and I don't know how to wake up. It was late, maybe around midnight. I was walking home after hanging out with some friends. The streets were mostly empty, with only a few cars passing by now and then. I usually enjoy these quiet walks, but last night felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, like something was about to go wrong. I tried to shake it off as just my imagination. As I walked, I saw something on the ground near the curb. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, but as I got closer, I realized it was a phone. A smartphone, lying there, screen up, glowing faintly. It was almost like it was waiting for someone to find it. I looked around, expecting to see someone coming back for it, but there was no one. The street was completely deserted. For a moment, I considered just leaving it there, but then I thought about how upset I would be if I lost my phone. So I picked it up, thinking I'd try to find the owner. The screen was still on, and there was a video playing. I didn't mean to watch it, but something about it caught my eye. The quality was poor, the image shaky, like it was filmed secretly. Two people were talking, but I couldn't see their faces, only their dark silhouettes. Their voices were low and serious, discussing something in detail. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was just a murmur of words, but then certain phrases stood out. Tonight, same place, don't let them see you. My heart started beating faster as I realized they were planning something bad. I wanted to turn the video off, but I couldn't. It was like my hands were frozen, forcing me to keep watching. Then, one of them mentioned a name. My name. They were talking about me. They described my appearance, my usual route home, even the clothes I was wearing. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke, right? I looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. The empty street that had felt peaceful moments ago now seemed dangerous. Every shadow looked like it was hiding someone. My breath quickened, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but I was too scared to move. As the video continued, something even more terrifying dawned on me. This wasn't a recording. It was a live feed. I could hear the sounds around me in the video, the faint hum of a car passing by, the rustle of leaves. It was happening right now. They were watching me. Panic took over. I dropped the phone like it was burning my hand and took a few steps back, staring at it as if it might jump at me. But then I realized that I couldn't just leave it there. Whoever was watching would know I found it. They might even be nearby, waiting for me to panic and run. I forced myself to pick it up again, trying to think clearly. I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere with lots of people. I remembered there was a 24-hour convenience store a few blocks away. If I could just make it there, maybe I could figure out what to do next. I started walking, fast, trying not to draw attention to myself, but every sound made me jump. Every person I passed felt like they could be one of them, the people from the video. I finally reached the store and rushed inside, feeling a brief moment of relief. There were a few people in the store, and the bright lights made me feel a little safer. I went to the back, near the coolers, trying to calm down and think. What should I do? Call the police? But what would I say? I found a phone, and it's showing a live feed of someone planning to kidnap me. It sounded crazy, even to me. As I stood there, the phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. My heart skipped a beat. The message was short, just a few words. Nice try, but we're still watching. I felt like I was going to be sick. They knew where I was. I looked around the store, but no one seemed out of place. How could they see me? I couldn't stay there. I needed to keep moving, stay ahead of them. But where could I go? I thought about calling someone, maybe one of my friends. But what if that put them in danger too? I couldn't risk it. Then I noticed a man standing near the entrance looking at me. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his face partially hidden. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching me. My stomach dropped. Was he one of them? I couldn't be sure, but I couldn't take the chance. I decided to leave, moving quickly towards the door, pretending not to notice him. As I stepped outside, I broke into a run, not caring anymore if I looked scared. I just needed to get away, find somewhere safe. But as I ran, the streets seemed to close in on me, every corner hiding a potential threat. I saw a taxi approaching and flagged it down, jumping inside before the driver could even ask where I was going. I told him to drive, just drive anywhere away from there. He looked at me like I was crazy but started driving. As we sped away, I looked back, half expecting to see someone chasing after us. The ride was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and my own heavy breathing. I tried to calm down, telling myself I was safe now. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with an address I didn't recognize. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The message said, "Come here if you want this to end." I dropped the phone on the seat, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. The taxi driver asked me if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. I didn't know if this was a trap or if they would find me no matter what I did. We drove on, the city lights blurring past, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. I didn't know where I was going or what I would find when I got there. All I knew was that this nightmare wasn't over. Not yet. I was supposed to house sit for a friend for just 2 weeks. She was going on a vacation and needed someone to take care of her cat and water the plants. It seemed easy enough. The house was in a quiet suburb not too far from my own place, and I thought it would be nice to have a change of scenery. The first night went smoothly. I fed the cat, watched some TV, and went to bed. The house was silent, almost too silent. It made me feel a little uneasy, but I brushed it off as just the unfamiliarity of the place. On the second night, things started to feel different. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a faint scratching noise coming from above me. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, but then it grew louder. I froze, listening. The sound was coming from the attic. I told myself it was probably just a rat or some other small animal. I tried to ignore it, but the noise continued, making it hard to sleep. Every time I was about to drift off, the scratching would start again, pulling me back to wakefulness. By the third night, the scratching had become louder, more persistent. It was like nails dragging across wood, slow and deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I felt like I was being watched, even though I knew I was alone in the house. I checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked, but it didn't help. The feeling of unease wouldn't go away. I went to the attic door, thinking maybe I should check it out, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. What if it wasn't just a rat? What if it was something worse? I pushed the thought away, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. A week passed, and the scratching continued every night, driving me to the edge of panic. I was getting no sleep, my nerves were shot, and I started to dread the evenings. I knew I couldn't go on like this, but I also couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to know what was making that noise. So one night, I made a decision. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the attic door. My hand trembled as I turned the knob, and the door creaked open, revealing the dark, narrow staircase leading up into the attic. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I was being stupid, that there was nothing to be afraid of, but the fear wouldn't go away. I slowly climbed the stairs, the flashlight beam trembling as I held it in front of me. The attic was cold, the air heavy with dust. The scratching had stopped, and the silence was even worse. I reached the top of the stairs and swept the flashlight across the room. It was filled with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten things covered in cobwebs. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but then the beam of light landed on something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the attic, hidden behind a pile of boxes, was a small makeshift bed, just a few old blankets spread out on the floor. Next to it were empty food cans and some personal belongings, a worn-out backpack, a dirty jacket, a few books. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been living in the attic, not just for a night, but for a long time. They had been watching me, listening to me, maybe even coming down into the house while I was sleeping. I felt sick, my mind racing with fear and horror. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. When the police arrived, I felt a wave of relief, but it didn't last long. They searched the attic, but it was empty. The makeshift bed was there, the cans, the belongings, but the person who had been living there was gone. They must have known I was coming and escaped before I could catch them. The police told me there was nothing more they could do. They said it was probably just a homeless person looking for a place to stay, that I shouldn't worry. But how could I not worry? Someone had been living above me, watching me, and they had gotten away. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed my things and left, calling my friend to explain what had happened. She was horrified, of course, but there was nothing she could do either. I went back to my own apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling of fear. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the person still watching me, still following me. I started hearing noises in my own place, scratches, footsteps, things moving in the dark. I didn't know if it was real or just my imagination. I stopped sleeping, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid of what might happen if I did. Even now, I lie awake at night, listening for any sound, any sign that the person has found me again. I know it sounds crazy, but after what happened, I can't help it. I can't forget that someone was in that house with me, and they could be anywhere now. Maybe they're still out there, waiting, watching, and I'm left wondering if I'll ever feel safe again. I never thought much about the small things. A book not where I left it. A window open when I was sure I closed it. My life was busy, and I was always rushing. Work, errands, trying to keep up with everything. So I just brushed it off. I told myself I was being forgetful, that maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. But now, looking back, I wish I had taken it seriously from the beginning. It started with the doors. I'd come home, and the front door would be unlocked. I live alone, so it didn't make sense. I always double-checked before leaving, making sure everything was secure. At first, I thought maybe I was just distracted, in a hurry. I locked it again, feeling a bit uneasy but not really worried. It was easy to think I was just being paranoid. Then it was the lights. I'd walk into a room and the light would be off, even though I remembered leaving it on. Or sometimes it would be on when I was sure I turned it off before going to bed. Little things like that started happening almost every day. It was enough to make me start second-guessing myself, wondering if I was losing my mind. One day I came home, and all the chairs around my kitchen table were pulled out. I had left them tucked in that morning, I was sure of it. That's when I really started to get scared. I couldn't explain it away anymore. Someone had been in my house. I told myself it was probably just a friend messing with me, maybe a neighbor who had a spare key from a long time ago. But who would do that? And why? It didn't make sense, but the idea that someone was playing a prank on me was easier to accept than the alternative, that a stranger was coming into my home. The turning point was when I found the camera. It was a Saturday, and I decided to clean my bedroom, something I'd been putting off for weeks. I was moving a small table near my bed when I noticed something odd. There, hidden in the clutter of wires and old chargers, was a tiny black camera. At first, I didn't understand what it was. I picked it up, staring at it in disbelief. Then it hit me. Someone had been recording me, watching me in my most private moments. I felt sick. My hands started shaking and I dropped the camera. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My bedroom, the one place where I thought I was safe, had been invaded. I kept asking myself, how long had it been there? Who put it there? The thought of someone watching me while I slept, while I changed, was unbearable. I went to the police, but they didn't take it seriously. They asked if I had any enemies or if someone had a reason to target me. I didn't know. I'm just an ordinary person, living a quiet life. They took the camera but said there wasn't much they could do unless I had more evidence. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about who could have done this, replaying every interaction I'd had with friends, neighbors, even coworkers. I set up my own cameras, trying to catch whoever was doing this. I wanted to feel safe again, to know that it was over. But the footage showed nothing. Days passed, and no one came into the house. It was like they knew I was watching now. Just when I thought maybe it was over, that maybe the person had realized I was onto them and stopped, I saw something on one of the recordings. It was late, and I was reviewing the footage from the night before, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. Then I saw it. A shadow moving through my living room. My heart raced as I watched the figure move quietly, slowly, through my home. They were careful, avoiding the cameras I had set up. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were familiar with my house. Too familiar. I froze. There was no mistaking it. This person knew me, knew my routines, knew how to avoid being caught. It wasn't just a random intruder. My mind raced through possibilities, and one name kept coming up. A neighbor who had always been too friendly, too interested in what I was doing. Someone who had offered to help me with small things, who had a spare key from when I first moved in and hadn't thought to ask for it back. The next day, I confronted them. My voice shook as I accused them of breaking into my house. of placing the camera in my bedroom. They didn't deny it. They just looked at me, their expression cold, almost bored. They said something about being curious, about wanting to make sure I was safe. But I could see in their eyes that it was more than that. It was about control, about power. I called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. The neighbor was arrested, but the damage was done. I couldn't stay in that house. Even after they were gone, I felt their presence everywhere. Every creak in the floor, every rustle in the night made my heart race. I moved out, but the fear followed me. I'm always looking over my shoulder now, always checking the locks, double-checking every small thing. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I live in a quiet neighborhood where nothing much ever happens. At least, it used to be that way. Recently, though, everything changed. There were break-ins almost every night. The news and social media were full of stories about it. People coming home to find their doors smashed in, their homes ransacked. It seemed like the kind of thing that always happened to other people, but suddenly, it was happening here. Everyone was talking about it. At work, at the grocery store, even in line at the coffee shop. Did you hear about the break-in on Elm Street? I heard the family was home when it happened. It's not safe anymore. The conversation stuck with me, playing over and over in my mind. That night, I tried to push those thoughts away. I wanted to relax, maybe watch a movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I made sure all the doors were locked, checked the windows twice. I even left a light on in the hallway, something I never do. I was trying to focus on the TV when I heard it. The doorbell rang. It was almost midnight. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound made my heart skip a beat. My first thought was maybe it was a neighbor, someone needing help. But then I remembered the stories, the break-ins, the families terrorized in their own homes. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Should I answer? Should I pretend I'm not home? I moved as quietly as I could, creeping toward the door. I didn't turn on the porch light. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was close. Slowly, I peeked through the peephole. All I could see was darkness. I started to back away, hoping whoever it was would just leave, when I heard a voice from the other side. It was low, calm, and it sent a chill down my spine. The voice said, "Open the door or I'll break it down." My blood ran cold. They didn't sound like they were joking. My hand shook as I reached for the deadbolt, making sure it was locked. I could barely breathe, my thoughts spinning out of control. Should I call the police? What if they don't get here in time? The voice came again, this time more insistent. "I'm not going to ask again. Open the door, now." I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any movement. I heard nothing for a moment, and then a loud thud. They were hitting the door, testing it. The sound echoed through the hallway, making my heart race even faster. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I tried to dial 911. The ringing seemed to go on forever, each second dragging out into eternity. Another thud, harder this time. I could hear the door frame creaking under the force. My mind was screaming at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't think. I just stood there, paralyzed with fear. Finally, the operator picked up. I whispered into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's trying to break into my house." The operator started asking questions, my address, if I could see the person, if there were any weapons, but I could barely focus on what they were saying. The only thing I could think about was the door and the way it was starting to splinter under the repeated blows. The voice on the other side of the door yelled again, now angry, frustrated. "This is your last chance. Open the door." My body moved on its own. I dropped the phone, grabbing the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy lamp from the side table. I held it close, my knuckles white with fear. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait for them to break in. I decided to try and escape through the back door. Moving as quietly as I could, I inched my way down the hall, keeping an ear out for any sign that they were coming in. Just as I reached the kitchen, I heard the sound I'd been dreading, glass shattering from the front of the house. I panicked, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the lamp. I knew I didn't have much time. I rushed to the back door, but the lock wouldn't budge. My hands were too sweaty, too clumsy with fear. I tried again, harder this time, until finally it clicked open. But just as I was about to step outside, I heard something that made me freeze. Sirens. They were faint, still far away, but getting closer. I paused, listening, hoping against hope that the intruder hadn't heard them too. The sound of breaking glass stopped. For a moment, everything was silent, and then, nothing. No footsteps, no voice, just the distant wail of police sirens getting louder. I waited, too scared to move, wondering if they had left, or if they were still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the intruder was gone. They checked the house, asked me a million questions, but I could barely answer. I was still in shock, my mind stuck on those last few moments. The silence, the feeling that someone was still out there watching. They said I was lucky, that the sirens must have scared them off. But I don't feel lucky. I don't feel safe. Every night since then, I hear that voice in my head, telling me to open the door, threatening to break in. I know they'll be back. They didn't get what they came for, and next time, I might not be so lucky. Last night was one of those nights where nothing felt right. You know the feeling? Like something is off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I had been feeling it all day, but I ignored it, thinking it was just one of those weird moods. After dinner, I decided to take a shower, hoping it would help me relax. The sound of the water always calms me down, and I needed that. I live alone, and usually I love the peace that comes with it. But that night, the silence was different. It felt heavy, like something was waiting. I remember turning on the shower and stepping in, letting the warm water wash over me. For a moment, I started to feel better. I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the weird feeling, focusing on the sound of the water hitting the tiles. It was comforting, almost enough to make me forget the strange unease that had been following me all day. But then, I felt it. I can't explain how I knew, but I just felt it. There was someone, or something, on the other side of the shower curtain. My heart started racing, and I told myself I was being stupid. Just my imagination, right? I've always had a vivid imagination, but this felt different. It was like the air in the bathroom changed, becoming thick and suffocating. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up. I could see a shadow moving just outside the curtain. It was faint, but it was there, shifting slightly. My mind started racing with thoughts. What if someone was in my house? How did they get in? What were they planning to do? I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just seeing things. But then again, what if it wasn't? I had to know. I had to look. My hand was shaking as I reached for the curtain, every second feeling like an eternity. Slowly, I pulled it back, expecting to see someone standing there, ready to attack me. But there was no one. The bathroom was empty. For a second, I felt relieved, like maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But then I noticed the door. It was locked. I always leave it slightly open, just in case, but now it was completely shut. My heart sank. I hadn't locked it. I was sure of that. Someone had to have locked it from the inside. Panic started to set in. I tried to unlock the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle just wouldn't turn. I yanked on it harder, but nothing happened. I started pounding on the door, calling out. But of course, there was no answer. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. The silence was too perfect, too complete, like someone was purposely staying quiet, waiting for me to lose it. I was trapped. My mind started playing tricks on me. What if they were still in the house? What if they were waiting for me to try and escape? I started to think maybe I was losing my mind. Was someone really there? Or was I just imagining it all? I kept pulling at the door harder and harder, but it still wouldn't move. My hands were shaking, and I could feel myself starting to hyperventilate. I needed to get out. I needed to get out now. Then I heard it. Faint. Almost like it was coming from far away. But it was there. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moving outside the bathroom. They were slow, careful, like whoever was out there didn't want to be heard. My blood ran cold. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was there. Someone was in my house. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to make out where they were. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent again. Then, I heard something else. A whisper, too low for me to make out the words, but it was there, just on the other side of the door. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, each one worse than the last. Was it a burglar? A stalker? Someone who had been watching me? I had no idea who it could be or what they wanted, but I knew I couldn't stay in that bathroom any longer. In a moment of pure desperation, I threw myself against the door again and again, until finally, something gave way, and the door swung open. I stumbled out, expecting to see someone there, but the hallway was empty. I stood there, dripping wet, my heart pounding, listening for any sign of movement. The house was quiet, too quiet. I quickly checked each room, my panic growing with every step. There was no one, no sign that anyone had been there at all, but something still felt wrong. The air in the house was heavy, like it was holding on to something that shouldn't be there. Then, I saw it. The front door. It was slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it earlier. I always lock it. But now, it was open, just a crack, enough for someone to slip in or out without making a sound. I stood there, staring at that door, my mind racing. Had they just left? Or were they still watching, waiting for me to let my guard down? I didn't know, and that was the worst part. The not knowing. I've been sitting here, staring at that door for hours now. I haven't moved. I can't. I keep telling myself it's over, that I'm safe. But deep down, I know that's not true. Someone was in my house tonight, and they could come back. Or maybe they never left. I found the journal by accident, and now I wish I hadn't. It was just another random day when I decided to stop by this small thrift store. I'm not a regular there, but sometimes I like to look for old books or random items. That day, something caught my eye. An old, leather-bound journal tucked between some dusty novels. The leather was worn, and the pages yellowed, but there was something about it that made me pick it up. I bought it, thinking it would be interesting to read. Maybe it was someone's travel journal or something. I never expected what I found inside. When I got home, I sat on my bed and started reading. The first few pages were normal, just notes and scribbles. But as I flipped through more pages, the entries became more detailed, almost obsessive. They described a plan to kidnap someone. The writer had written down every detail, from the target's appearance to their daily routine. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as I read more. This wasn't just a plan, It was a blueprint for something terrible. As I read on, a cold feeling crept over me. The description of the target started to sound familiar. Short hair, glasses, a scar above the left eyebrow. It was like looking in a mirror. I kept reading, hoping it was just a weird coincidence. But then, I saw the details of the target's daily routine, leaving the apartment at 8 a.m., taking the same route to work, stopping by the same coffee shop every morning. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the routine matched mine exactly. Panic set in, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just a bizarre coincidence, or maybe someone was playing a sick joke. I grabbed my phone and started comparing the journal entries with my own schedule. Everything lined up, the times, the places, even the small things like when I stopped to check my phone or when I usually took a break at work. This can't be real, I told myself. But the fear gnawed at me, growing stronger with every page I turned. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I decided to change my routine, just to be safe. I left my apartment earlier than usual and took a different route to work. I avoided the coffee shop and kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out at me. But nothing happened. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I thought. But that feeling of being watched never went away. I could feel eyes on me, even though I couldn't see anyone. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Over the next few days, the paranoia grew. I started noticing the same car parked near my apartment every day. It was an old, beat-up sedan, nothing special, but it was always there. I told myself it was just a neighbor's car, but deep down, I didn't believe that. One evening, as I was walking home, I saw someone watching me from across the street. They were just standing there, staring. My heart raced, and I quickly walked the other way, trying to lose them in the crowd. When I looked back, they were gone, but the fear stayed with me. I didn't know what to do. The journal had me trapped in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That I found a journal in a thrift store that described a plan to kidnap me? They'd think I was crazy. The last straw came when I found a note slipped under my door. It was just one line. "We're watching you." My hands shook as I read it. They knew where I lived. They were close. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag with whatever I could and left that night, not knowing where I would go. I tried to keep moving, never staying in one place too long. But the feeling of being watched followed me everywhere. Every time I saw someone staring at me or noticed the same car driving by, the fear came rushing back. I couldn't escape it. Now I'm on the run, constantly looking over my shoulder, never knowing who's watching or when they'll make their move. I don't know if the journal was real or if it was just a sick joke. Maybe it was meant to drive me insane, to make me question everything and everyone. But one thing is clear. I can't go back to my old life. I don't know who I can trust anymore. All I know is that I have to keep running, keep hiding, because if they find me, I don't want to think about what happens next. Maybe one day I'll wake up and realize it was all in my head. But for now, every shadow feels like a threat, every stranger a possible attacker. I'm not sure how long I can keep this up, but I have no choice. The fear is real, and it's the only thing keeping me alive. Tifu woke up, trapped in my room with a terrifying message on the wall. I woke up this morning to something that will haunt me forever. My head hurt like I'd been hit with a hammer, and everything felt off. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No usual morning sounds, just silence. As I tried to get out of bed, I realized the door was locked from the outside. My heart sank. I rubbed my eyes, trying to understand what was happening. That's when I saw it. The writing on the wall in big, messy letters. Don't try to leave. They're already inside. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I tried to remember what happened last night, but it was all a blur. I didn't even remember going to bed. My mind raced with questions. Who wrote that? Who locked me in? And most importantly, who are they? I forced myself to get up, my legs shaky under me. The room felt wrong, like it wasn't mine. But it was mine. My bed, my posters on the wall, my clothes scattered on the floor. Everything was familiar but strange, like a bad dream. I started checking the room, trying to find some clue about what was happening. Every little noise made me jump. I looked under the bed, in the closet, even behind the curtains, but there was nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, hiding just out of sight. My phone was on the bedside table, but it was dead. I cursed under my breath. I always charged it overnight, but now it was completely useless. I felt more trapped with each passing second, like the walls were closing in on me. I ran to the door and started banging on it, yelling for help. My fists hurt, but I kept going, hoping someone would hear me. But there was no response. My neighbors were usually home at this time. Where was everyone? The silence outside was suffocating. I stopped, panting and desperate. My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything that could help me escape. There was nothing useful, no tools, nothing sharp. I tried the windows, but they were locked too, and the glass was thick. No way to break it without making a huge noise, and I didn't want to attract them, whoever they were. As I stood there, staring at the writing on the wall, my fear turned into a cold dread. What if they were already in the room? What if they had been here the whole time watching me? I felt my skin crawl at the thought, and my head filled with dark images of someone or something lurking in the shadows. I needed to get out, but how? I tried to think of everything I knew about the room, about the apartment. There had to be something I could use, something I hadn't thought of. My mind kept circling back to the same terrible thought. What if there was no way out? In my panic, I started tearing the room apart. I pulled the blankets off the bed, threw the pillows across the room, and emptied my drawers onto the floor. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I had to do something, anything. That's when I found it. A small notebook under my bed, one I had never seen before. It was old, with yellowed pages and a cracked cover. My hand shook as I opened it. The handwriting inside was messy and familiar. Too familiar. It was mine. But the things written inside didn't make any sense. Pages filled with strange, rambling thoughts, words scratched out in anger, and sketches that made my stomach turn. They were drawings of faces, twisted and distorted, eyes staring blankly. I could barely recognize them, but they felt like they were looking right at me. The last entry made my blood run cold. It was dated last night, and it said, "They're inside. Lock the door. Don't let them leave." I dropped the notebook like it was burning my hands. What was happening to me? I couldn't remember writing any of this. Was I losing my mind? Or had someone else done this to mess with me? Before I could think any further, I heard it, a creak behind me, like someone shifting their weight. I froze. Slowly, I turned around, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. In the corner of the room, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I knew them. It was someone I knew well, someone I trusted. But why were they here, hiding in my room? I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind raced with questions, but the fear was too much. The figure stepped forward and I saw their face. It was familiar but wrong, twisted by something dark. They looked at me with an expression that chilled me to the bone, a mix of pity and fear. Then it hit me. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who had been trying to help me. But why were they hiding? And what had I done to make them so scared of me? The realization struck me like a punch to the gut. The door, the message, the notebook. It was all me. I had done this. But why? I couldn't remember. But the fear in their eyes told me everything. I was the danger here. In that moment, I wasn't sure if I was the victim or the monster. The memory of last night was gone, lost in a fog of confusion and terror. But one thing was clear. I wasn't safe. Not from them, and not from myself. I wanted to scream, to beg them to tell me what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. We just stood there, trapped in that awful silence as the walls seemed to close in on us. And then, without a word, they turned and ran. The door slammed shut behind them, and I was alone again. The message on the wall glaring at me, a terrible reminder of what I had become. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen in fear and confusion. All I know is that I'm still here, still trapped, and I'm scared of what I might do next.